Hello and welcome to the Chillers and Thrillers Halloween special. I'm so glad you're here, and if this is your first time listening to the podcast, I am your host Em, and in this podcast I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. This year's Halloween special is packed with creepy stories that I've saved throughout the year, and stories from fellow horror paranormal podcasts, Ghost Gossip, The Red Treehouse, and I Scream, You Scream. As the veil between our world and the other becomes the thinnest on Halloween, I hope you enjoy these chilling and spooky stories to cap off your season. Before we get started, a special thank you to new Patreon subscriber Catherine. Thank you for joining the Ghouls and Ghosts Social Club. If you'd like to join to support the podcast, you can go to the link in the show notes and access bonus episodes and early releases for $3 a month. Another great way to continue supporting the podcast is to leave a rating and review through your preferred podcast subscriber. If you're using Spotify, feel free to leave a comment as well. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a review along with your rating. It helps spread the word. Now, this is a long episode, so let's not waste any more time. Grab your favorite Halloween treat, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen in. Rainbow, submitted by Anonymous. My parents thought they were going to have one child. My mom had my brother the summer before I started 4th grade. I was relatively okay with this. My mom had a C-section and her mom came to stay because my baby brother was huge and my dad had to get back to work. People were very generous and lots of gifts were sent to the hospital. One gift included a helium balloon with a rainbow on it. The first sign of trouble was when I woke up and the balloon was in the room with me. This was odd since I slept with my door closed, but I figured it must have gone in before I shut my door, or my grandmother opened my door to check in on me, or something. The next day, the balloon was floating over my brother's crib. The third day, I was in the shower washing my hair with the bathroom door closed and the shower curtain also closed. When I turned away from the faucet, the balloon was in the shower with me. My screams woke the baby. My mom was furious with me. She locked a balloon in a closet. That night, when she woke up, the balloon was over her. When she woke up in the morning, the balloon was still in the closet. That morning, my grandmother went outside with me so I could swim. We had a small deck off an enclosed porch, and then stairs leading down to the pool. I was standing on the diving board facing the porch when I saw the porch door open. It was a screen door, so it opened out instead of in. I thought my mom was coming out. It was the balloon. It turned on the deck, so the rainbow was facing me. Then it started walking down the stairs, like a human. It didn't float from the deck into the yard like a normal balloon would. It went down each step like a person or an animal climbs stairs. I was screaming from the point the balloon came out instead of my mom. My grandmother joined the chorus. The screen door opened again. This time my mom ran out with the scissors. She had been standing in the kitchen looking at my grandmother and I through the window and saw the screen door open and the balloon go out. She chased the balloon down, and as she stabbed it over and over with the scissors, the balloon screamed. A little backstory. My mother's brother committed suicide a few years prior to this. Oddly, my brother and I favor him to an insane degree. Not only do we physically resemble him far more than we do our actual parents, but we actually have his mannerisms, gestures, and patterns of speech. Although I spent very little time with him as a small child, and my brother was clearly born after his death. A bit more backstory. He committed suicide in a work truck. My family decided to have the work truck crushed. The work truck did not agree with this. First, it refused to crank. Then, it almost killed someone as it was loaded onto the flatbed tow truck. Then, as they loaded it onto the crusher, it cranked and almost ran over someone else. My surviving uncle reported seeing a weird creature standing on his staircase, staring at him silently for a couple of years after his brother died. That's mostly the end, except my brother has a lifelong fear of balloons. Oh, and then my own daughter was born on the anniversary of my uncle's death. And one day, when she was a preschooler and we got a cat, she turned to me, smiled, and said, "I'm going to name it Rainbow. You need to know that the rainbow was never going to hurt you." Gary's House, submitted by user Baby Carrot. I'm telling the story on behalf of my bestie, who was taken to rationalizing the whole series of events. If you ask him about it now, he'll say, it was all just stress and anxiety. The more I think of it, the less I believe something supernatural was going on. To clarify, he's given me permission to tell the story, and lucky for you, I'm going to offer up a slew of sensible explanations for what went down. I 100% believe that there was some otherworldly stuff going on, based on everything he initially told me and that I saw for myself. And to be quite honest, I think he secretly does as well. He just doesn't want to admit it. My friend Gary is the definition of a rational man, which is why it freaked me out so much when he mentioned that his house might be haunted. Gary is the atheist son of two atheist doctors and has a scientific explanation for everything. He likes to mock my spiritual inclinations. I was raised very religious, and my belief in things beyond this world has never really died. So you bet that my interest was piqued when he brought up his haunting. About a year ago, the lease ended on Gary and my shared apartment. I moved in with my boyfriend, and he moved into an old 1930s era house with roommates. I helped Gary carry a few boxes over to his new place, and I immediately got an oppressive vibe, heavy and sad, but I just brushed it off. It was an old, dark, creepy house, of which there are many in our city, so what do I know? Anyway, that could have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Immediately after the move, our friendship changed. At first, I chalked the weirdness up to physical distance. We didn't see each other every day like we used to, and we weren't spending hours on the couch laughing and gossiping over a bottle of wine each night. But as time went on, I thought it was odd I never heard from him. He even stopped sending me stupid memes, a red flag if there was ever one. About a month after the move, we finally met up for coffee. Gary didn't seem like himself. He looked haggard, beyond stressed, and like he hasn't slept in weeks. I asked him what was going on, and he said he didn't quite know. Everything just felt off. Gary has always struggled with depression, but since the move, he said he had been experiencing crushing anxiety and an even deeper depression. For whatever reason, he never felt like going home. He would stay out super late every night, going to bars and even seeing movies alone, purely to avoid being home. He said it wasn't his roommates. He liked them just fine. They were friends before having moved in together. But for whatever reason, the vibe around the house was just really tense. Their personalities meshed well outside of the house, but whenever they were home together, they would start to pick petty fights about chores and personal habits. After he told me all of this, I felt a little freaked out, remembering the oppressive feeling I got from the house. Mainly, I was just worried about my friend, though. The next time Gary and I hung out, he was even worse, even more tired, haggard, and worn. He seemed super anxious and jittery. We were walking around doing a little shopping when he mentioned that he needed to buy fly strips. When I asked him why, he said, "Oh yeah, my house is infested with flies. They're everywhere." At that point, I asked him, "What's going on? Are you okay?" And he admitted that things were only getting weirder inside the house. He never wanted to be at home anymore, and his feelings of dread towards the house had only intensified. The fights with his roommates had become more frequent and volatile, and, oh yeah, he started having nightmares. Gary said he'd never been able to remember his dreams before, but now he dreamt every night. Vividly, and they were never nice dreams. He looked so freaked out I didn't know what to do. I offered to let him stay at my place whenever he wanted, and he seemed grateful. The next day, I texted Gary semi-jokingly, asking him how the fly situation was going. And he texted back, "All the fly strips are filled, but there are somehow more flies. I'm starting to think this house is haunted." This is when I really started to feel freaked out for poor Gary. Him using the word haunted seemed so out of character, I immediately texted him back, telling him to stay at my place. But he didn't text back. A few days later, he called me, wanting to meet for a drink. When I saw him at the bar, he, for lack of a better phrase, looked like he had seen a ghost. I asked him if he was okay, and it was only then that I learned exactly what had been going on inside the house. He hadn't told me before because he didn't want to sound crazy. Here's everything he said happened. Shortly after moving in, the bad feeling and feeling of dread started. Like he told me, he never wanted to be at the house and would avoid the house at all costs. He was never sure why he hated it so much, but the dread was sometimes overwhelming. Then, the fights with his roommates started. Over dishes, over forgetting to flush the toilet, petty stuff, but he said that they would lose it on each other sometimes. Shortly thereafter, he started having nightmares for the first time in his life. Things he hadn't mentioned before is that his room would sometimes feel cold and clammy even though he turned on the heat. It was almost like a thick, invisible fog rolled in. Sometimes there was a weird, sickly sweet smell in the house, but only isolated to one area at a time. Objects started going missing, and one of his roommates suddenly, out of nowhere, started dreaming about typewriters. Just typewriters. She would hear the heavy clicking of keys just pounding in her ears. Next, the flies came. They tried getting rid of them through every means possible, but they kept coming. Then, one night, Gary woke up from a dead sleep to see someone crouched at his bedside near his head. A tall, thin person leaning in, looking at him, their long fingers extending onto his bedspread. He said he knew it was looking at him, but at the same time, he wouldn't be able to tell you if this thing had a face. Gary freaked out and turned on the lights, but whatever it was already gone. When his roommates heard him screaming bloody murder, they came running. He told them what he saw, saying it was probably just a bad dream, but the consensus was that it was not a dream. It turns out everyone living in that house had experienced spooky events since moving in. The next day, they burned sage and walked around the house telling whatever thing was there to leave. And the day after that, all the flies died at once. Things got better for Gary after that. He still didn't like that house, and he wound up breaking his lease and moving out early, but pretty quickly after the sage burning extravaganza, his anxieties lessened. I saw him more, he was sleeping again and seemed 1,000 times more at peace. He seemed like himself again. A few weeks after the ghost left, Gary's landlord came to stay with them. That's just weird, right? But Gary said the landlord had a special arrangement with his tenants. Whenever he wanted to stay at the house, they were supposed to let him. The strangest part, he always insisted in sleeping in Gary's room. Why? Because that was his mother's room. Another spooky fact, the landlord said his mother was a hoarder and had died in the house. Her favorite thing to collect was old typewriters, and she kept him in the room across the hall from Gary's, his roommate's bedroom. the one who kept dreaming about the typewriters. These two stories are courtesy of Catherine and Gina from the I Scream, You Scream podcast. Make sure to check them out. Their link is in the show notes. Story 1. After graduating from school, I lived with my parents for a while before finding a job and my own place. They live in the middle of nowhere, and I'm a city girl at heart, so it was often a struggle for me to be there. I had come from living in Chicago to deep in farm country, and it was a shock to the system, to say the least. One of the few things I really loved about being there was that, compared to where I had been in the city, the night sky from their house was absolutely stunning. Since this was not the house I had grown up in, it was always astonishing how beautiful the night sky is there. All of this is to say, I would sit out on the back porch or front stoop any chance I got so I could watch the sky. One night, I was sitting on the front stoop watching the stars. I was home alone that night because my parents were out of town, and my brother, who was also staying there at the time, was out with friends. Directly above where I was sitting is a giant window from the second floor landing. The light in the landing was on, so I could see the light shining through the window and reflecting on the driveway in front of me. So there I was, watching the stars and minding my business, when out of nowhere, I saw movement on the driveway. I looked down, expecting to see a frog or bunny or something passing through. What I saw instead made my stomach drop. There was a shadow in the shape of a person that appeared to be looking out the window above me. There's nothing in that window that would have made the shape. And even if there was, that shadow had not been there when I first got out, moments before. I thought maybe my brother had come home early and I just didn't hear him, so I went back inside and called for him. But there was no answer. I could see from where I was in the entryway that his bedroom door was open and his lights were off. So he clearly was not home, because if he was sleeping in there, his door would have been closed. I went back outside to look at the reflection from the window, and the shadow that had previously been there was gone. I later told my family what I had seen, and while they weren't completely dismissive, I've told them about a lot of allegedly spooky encounters throughout the years, so they were kind of just like, here comes Catherine with another ghost story. I kept insisting that the house had weird vibes, and while not necessarily negative, there was definitely an energy there. Fast forward several months later, when I had my own place in Milwaukee, about 40 minutes from where my parents live. My aunt and uncle had come to visit my parents for a long weekend. I came over to my parents' house to see them, and when I got there, my mom asked, "Can you confirm to your aunt that you did not stop by at any point last night?" I was super confused because there would have been no reason for me to make the drive in the middle of the night, only to turn around to go home, then come back the next morning. When I said this to them, they all looked confused and skeptical. My aunt went on to explain that in the middle of the night, she heard the sound of the front door opening and footsteps walking through the entryway and up the stairs. She heard some lights flick on, and she got out of bed to see who had come in, because she thought everyone who was staying there was already in for the night. She thought maybe it was me and my room had been turned into the guest room, so she didn't want to startle me if I came in and saw them. When she came out of the guest room, all the lights were off, the doors were locked, and no one was there. She's pretty skeptical of the paranormal, so the fact that she felt strange vibes and had a weird experience was all the validation that I needed. Story 2. When I was in high school, I babysat a little girl from the time she was about 3 up to when she was 5 or 6. We'll call her Riley. Her dad worked with my dad, so I often watched her when her parents would go out to work parties or events. After I got to know them a bit more, I would come over to help with Riley while her mother, who we'll call Kathleen, did housework, run errands, etc. After spending a lot of time with them, I grew up to be pretty good friends with Kathleen. She confided in me about her marriage, and I learned that she and her husband were not doing well. Retrospectively, I realized it's a bit weird for a grown woman to use her child's high school babysitter as a therapist, but I thought I was super grown at 17, so I didn't realize this was weird. I did realize, however, that there were issues in her marriage before she even told me, because the energy in their house was always quite heavy and dark. You could just tell there was a lot of fighting. One night, I came over to babysit so they could go to a work event. As soon as I arrived, I could tell they had been arguing right before I got there. The air was so heavy. Riley was really quiet while we were playing that night. She didn't say much and seemed kind of detached. Eventually it was time for bed, so I took her upstairs and tucked her in, and she usually went to bed just fine, but that night she was insistent that I stay with her longer than usual. I asked if she was okay and if she wanted to talk about anything. She just kept looking around the room, and I could tell she was afraid to be alone, but wouldn't tell me what she was scared of. I stayed with her several minutes after she finally fell asleep, just to make sure she was fully out. Then I went down to the living room to watch TV until her parents got home. About half an hour later, I hear a creak on the stairs. I couldn't see the staircases from where I was sitting on the couch, but I could see Riley's shadow on the wall from the entryway light, as it would have been shining behind her from where she was on the steps. The stairs creaked again, and I could see her shadow move lower, as if she had taken another step down the stairs. I figured she was still scared of whatever she had been nervous about before, so I muted the television and I said, "Riley, you don't need to sneak. You can come in and watch TV with me if you want." She didn't move or make a sound. I repeated myself so she knew she wouldn't get in trouble for being awake past her bedtime, but still nothing. I got up from the couch and walked over to the entryway where the stairs were to let her know I wasn't mad she was awake. When I rounded the corner, expecting to see her right there, directly to my left on the stairs, there was nobody there. I looked to my right, where her shadow had been on the wall, and it was completely clear. None of the shadows or movements that had just been there moments ago. There is no way she could have gone back up the stairs and into her bedroom without me hearing her, as the house was extremely old and the stairs were very creaky. I went up to her room to check on her, and she was sound asleep, snoring softly. I'm not sure exactly who it was that I saw. Part of me thinks there was some kind of negative spirit in that house, but I like to believe that whoever I saw on the stairs was someone watching over Riley. The family would eventually move back to their hometown several states away, and the parents did end up getting a divorce. I lost touch with them over the years, but I always wonder what Riley experienced during the few short years she lived in that house, and I wish I could have taken the chance to ask her if she had any strange experiences before we lost touch. I still think of her often and just hope she's doing well now, regardless of what she may have experienced when she was little. Please help me. Submitted by user Refuse Disastrous 9086. The following is a true account of my experience attempting an all-night hike on November 18th, 2024. If anyone has an explanation for these events, please let me know. These are all real. 2 days ago, I went to a state park a while north of me to attempt an all-night hiking venture that I thought would be fun and maybe a little scary. But only scary enough to have a good story, you know? The most I was prepared for was fighting coyotes over my food, but I was very wrong. Without boring you with details, I will immediately begin describing what happened. I got to East Fork Estate Park in Batavia around 7 p.m. Given the time of the year, it was already dark. I myself am very aware of the effects that aesthetics can have on the body, so I began picking a spot near the lake and cooking my food. I placed a T-bone steak onto my propane grill and began to cook it. However, after turning around to rummage through my pack for a second flashlight, my hand stumbled across something cold and hard. I picked it up, and to my utter confusion, it was the steak that I could have sworn I prepared already. I looked down to see my propane grill running, but with nothing on it. In the woods, your senses are already off a bit, and events that otherwise wouldn't worry you are quite frightening. I was immediately put off by this occurrence as I'm not on any medication, nor do I have any known mental illnesses. In an attempt to regain my comfort, I took the steak and once again placed it on the grill. I stared at it and watched it sizzle. I even waited to be able to smell the steam before I took my eyes off of it. I then continued looking for my flashlight, and all was well for a few hours. By this event, I had hiked maybe a mile. I was moving quite slow compared to normal, and the steak thing was still in my mind, but not worrying. I came around a bend where the trees began to get more dense and sat lower, when I saw a deer standing maybe 20 yards ahead, perfectly positioned, facing me on the trail. I was not worried by this yet, though, and actually reached for my phone to take a picture. I wanted to wait for the deer to turn its head, which I assumed it would, as deer's eyes are placed on the sides of their heads, before taking the photo. I stood there making eye contact with this buck for a solid 45 seconds before I began to question things. Eventually, I gave up and took the photo, and then began to approach the deer to get it to move so I could continue the hike. As I got closer, however, the deer remained unfazed. Baffled, I took my phone out once again and began recording. I approached the deer slowly and was able to get within 10 feet of it before I heard it exhale and it hopped off. I was extremely surprised by this behavior, but not yet scared. I continued hiking, and by this point, I had stopped thinking about the steak event. For about another hour, I was granted a peaceful hike, until I reached an area where the path came to a bald spot in the trees. As I was looking around, it was cut short as the absolutely pungent stench of burning hair and rotting flesh was the only thing I could detect. The smell was so incredibly present that I immediately began to vomit. This is nothing strange because I'm typically very sensitive to smells and my stomach is easily upset. However, what was not normal was that I kept vomiting. I lost every single thing I had eaten and I heaved probably about 5 times before then dry heaving another 3. By this point, I was laying on the ground in excruciating pain and crying. I could see my hands illuminated in a soft red glow, and when I stopped heaving, I looked up and saw the light over the trees with no source. Sort of if someone was holding a really bright flashlight at you from meters away. I scrambled to my feet and began running. I had no idea what was going on, but I assumed I was extremely ill. Between the hallucinations and vomiting, I was convinced I was poisoned or ate something I should not have at some point. I ripped out my flashlight and began walking. The way back was normal, and besides my horrible stomachache, I was generally fine. However, upon crossing the base of the peninsula that I cooked on, I felt my flashlight get jerked out of my hand. I turned back unbothered, thinking the string had been caught on a stick, but I realized that I was in an area of strictly sand, with no vertical objects anywhere near. I turned back to the direction and continued. At this point, I was no longer afraid. I was feeling that kind of fear you feel as a child when you first wake up from a bad dream, where the back of your throat got that odd feeling. I made it up a rather steep hill and looked back at the peninsula. And what I saw generally has my mind in shambles to this day. I saw myself turned around, looking for my flashlight. Frozen with confusion and fear, I just watched. The other me searched frantically and eventually fell to his hands and knees, searching. I then heard something which I cannot express enough terror with words to convey the emotion I was feeling. I watched in the distance as I began to physically rip myself apart. I ripped off my own limbs and began to eat my fingers. The real me, who was watching this, once again began to vomit, and that stench of burning hair once again returned. Looking back at the peninsula, I saw nothing. The hallucination of me was gone, but the smell remained. I began running and found the trail again. I actually passed a camping shelter with 3 walls and a very slanted roof, which I do not remember from the journey before, but the short bridge afterwards solidified in my mind that I was in the right path. I began to run, guided only by spots of dim moonlight on the ground. I sprinted longer than I have ever before, and eventually made it to the exit, where I immediately threw my stuff in the passenger seat and drove away. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me, and there are many feelings and details that I left out to keep this as short as I could while maintaining a degree of explanation. I am begging, if anyone recognizes these as symptoms of an illness or psychoactive drug, please tell me. If this is something entirely else, please tell me. I am begging for an explanation. In reply to this post, Reddit user SnacksyYumYum replied to the original poster with the following. This is so weird because I actually grew up on the road that butts up the East Fork near the Bantam side of the lake. I can remember a night driving on a back road in the park and came upon a huge buck in the middle of the road. We stared at each other for a long time. I inched my car closer thinking he would run away, and he didn't. He stared at me, and then I ended up backing my car up and turning around. It was very weird. Anyway, what I really wanted to say was that there is an old pioneer church/cemetery on that same side of the park, and just a couple of park gates up from that is an old burial mound. There used to be a large Native American presence in the area. Who knows what kind of spirits they may have called upon the land. I've heard many stories through the year about the park, but surprisingly don't have any experiences myself. But that area can get very creepy at night. George and Other Shadows, submitted by user Marcy7. For the last year of college and first year out of college, I was woken up around 3 a.m. every night randomly, and I would see people in my room. They weren't scary, but I couldn't see their faces. The first few times it happened, I could get within inches of them, and they wouldn't disappear until I turned on the light. I was always in this half-asleep state. I'd feel like I was awake, but once I turned on the light, my heart would be racing and I'd just be kind of confused. So my assessment was that I was sleep hallucinating somehow, like sleep paralysis, but without being paralyzed. My mom is a nurse and always my go-to for things like this. Unfortunately, she's also kind of hippy-dippy and goes to a church that believes you can talk to dead people. The Reverend is a medium. So obviously, she's convinced that I am legit seeing spirits and that I need to either help them or apologize and tell them I cannot help them and ask them to go away. My stepdad gave me a bracelet to ward off evil spirits. Eventually, I realized that if I wore a sleep mask to bed, I wouldn't wake up and therefore could get a full night's sleep. However, I forgot it a whole bunch when I stayed with my boyfriend, and I ended up buying one for his place eventually, but after being out partying with his friends, I'd often forget it. Remember how I said the visions weren't scary? Well, at my boyfriend's place, they were terrifying. Instead of just people kind of aimlessly milling about, these were scary visions and I could see their faces. His bed faced a sliding door to the living room, and his cat would open it in the middle of the night. One night, it was open about a quarter of the way, and I saw a man hanging from a light fixture in the living room, swinging in and out of view. Another time, a guy with dreadlocks was in bed with me instead of my boyfriend. Another time, it was an old man, skin rotting off his face, arms outstretched to strangle me. Every time I'd wake up screaming, he'd turn on the lights, tell me it was okay, and hold me until I fell asleep. I also had terrible, scary nightmares about people with blacked out eyes. For his grandma's birthday, the whole family got together for lunch at his house. A little backstory. It's a 3-story house. His grandparents had the bottom floor, he had the middle, and various family members had lived on the top floor, but now there were non-relatives living there. Someone mentioned the name George during this lunch, and I asked, "Who's George?" "The only good ghost that lives in his house." His grandma was a terrible alcoholic. Not mean, but the kind that would get herself in a lot of trouble. Every time she was lost somewhere or passed out drunk during a walk in the neighborhood, George would appear, and they know that Grandma was in trouble. He was a man in a tuxedo and a top hat. I asked what they meant by the only good ghost. Turns out, ever since his uncle painted a pentagram in the closet as a teenager, weird stuff has been happening. For one, that pentagram could not be covered, no matter how many times they painted over it. Side note, I know pentagrams aren't inherently bad, but the intention behind it is definitely not good if it comes from an angsty teen. Another uncle, who lived in the top floor for a bit, had a girlfriend who was a medium, and after one night in the house, she refused to come back because of something in the closet. His cousins, who lived in the top floor as kids, said their toys would turn on in the middle of the night and wake them up. Later, I asked my boyfriend why he never told me all of this. He knew about my night visions and how they were scary at his house, but not at my own. He told me that he didn't want to scare me, but that not only did he have the same dreams about the people with blacked out eyes, but that most times I woke up screaming. He had just been woken up moments before and seen shadows in the room. Then I'd wake up and scream about evil visions pointing in the same directions he'd seen the shadows. He could have been messing with me, but we broke up later that year and I would see the visions occasionally at my parents' house, but not very often. After I needed to get an emergency gallbladder removal, they stopped almost entirely. Though that night I saw about 5, including a very old nurse who kept checking in on me, and my mom insisted that the nurse who was there that night was younger than I was. I get maybe 1 visit a year now. I've reconnected with that ex a few times. Apparently, the shadows left after we broke up, and George hasn't been seen since his grandma passed away. I was delighted to be a guest on the Ghost Gossip podcast with Ashley. These next 2 stories are narrated by the host of Ghost Gossip, and if you'd like to listen to the full episode, check out Ghost Gossip included in the show notes. I hope you enjoy, and thanks again, Ashley, for having me on the show and doing this story swap with me.
Okay, so this is from one of my listeners, and her name is Melissa, and she has a lot of stories. And this one gave me chills. I've always been able to see and feel things. I never thought much about it. I just assumed it was normal. Recently, I found out that my mom and her sister sense things too. I personally believe it's because their dad and his family were part Cherokee. The first really scary experience happened when I was 18, just before I got married to my first husband. We had found a duplex through a leasing office and somehow got in with no down payment. That should have been my first red flag. But I was young and excited to have my own place for the first time ever. The leasing agent gave me the keys and told me to check it out before deciding. She never went to the duplex with us. She mentioned that it had a few holes in the wall that needed repair and some spray paint art. My dad helped me patch and paint the walls, but my mom refused to go in. She said something about the place felt really off and made her extremely uneasy, which wasn't like her at all. So she stayed out front while we worked. A couple weeks later, we got married and moved in. Both of us worked night shifts. One night, I got a ride home from a coworker, and as we pulled up, every single light in the house was flickering on and off. The TV was flipping through the channels on its own. We looked at each other, and we both knew this house wasn't just occupied by me and my husband. My coworker came inside with me, and the moment we stepped through the door, everything stopped. We talked for a few minutes, and although it felt strange, neither of us sensed anything evil or dangerous. This kind of activity happened a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Then, about 6 weeks in, my husband was called into work early one evening, leaving me home alone with our 2 rescue pups. It was the first night I'd ever been alone there. Around 7 or 8 p.m., both dogs started growling and trying to get out of the house. I had the bedroom window open to the backyard. West Texas nights in October are pretty warm, and one of the dogs actually pushed through the window screen to get out. Once outside, they kept barking and growling nonstop. They were usually quiet dogs, so this was completely out of character. Then suddenly, the radio in the living room turned on full blast. The kitchen cabinets and drawers started slamming open and shut, and the dishes began flying against the dining room and living room walls. I bolted to the bedroom, planning to escape through the side door, but I'd left my keys in the room. As soon as I grabbed them, the bedroom door slammed shut behind me, and I couldn't get out. It was 1995, so I didn't have a cell phone, but thankfully, there was a landline in the room. I called my mom, terrified, and told her to come get me. She arrived quickly, came inside, and yelled, "That's enough." Instantly, everything stopped. The bedroom door unlocked on its own. Some of the cabinets and drawers were still open, some closed. But everything was still again. What's even stranger is that both the TV and the radio had been unplugged, and neither had batteries. I'd unplugged them after the earlier incidents. I took my dogs and went straight into my parents' house. I never stepped foot in that side of the duplex again. My dad and my husband went back later with a trailer to move everything out. My husband never believed me, of course. A few weeks later, the woman from the leasing office called and said she planned to take us to court because the holes in the spray paint were still there. That didn't make sense. We'd fixed everything. So I started digging into the address. I found out that, a few years earlier, rival gang members had been shot in the park and parking lot right across the street from the property, and at least 3 people had died inside that very house. It wasn't converted into a duplex until a couple years later. I eventually went back and spoke to the woman who lived on the other side. She worked nights as a guard at the prison new hospital unit, so she wasn't home much either, but she knew about what had happened. She told me she regularly used sage and black salt to cleanse her space. Years later, after my divorce, I drove by again, and the duplex had been torn down.
Story 2.
When we started packing up my childhood home to move my mom's things down with us, my best friend brought her cousin along to help and to take all the dolls my mom had collected. Mom had at least 45 or more. More power to all the doll collectors. I just couldn't do it. One of those dolls, though, had something or someone attached to it. I could never be near that particular doll for more than a few minutes without feeling physically sick. Every time, I got this heavy, icky, unsettling feeling, along with a deep sadness I couldn't explain. My cousin's friend, who we'll call Kay, walked in and immediately said, "Wow, last night I prayed and asked to be connected to this home." That stopped me in my tracks because she had never been to our house before. She lived 3 hours away in another state. Kay said she had seen a young girl about 10 years old coming and going through my mom's house ever since my dad passed away in July 2015. She said she could feel my mom's sadness and had even seen the little girl watching over her. My mom, who has dementia, used to tell me the same thing, that there was a little girl who would look at my dad's pictures, sit near the TV, and even share popcorn or ice cream with her. Mom's always been sensitive to spirits. She could see, hear, smell, and even talk to them. I'm a little different. I tend to see them in different ways, like my dreams, and I can communicate with them that way. And I sometimes catch glimpses while awake. They don't appear as solid people to me, not like they do for my mom. Anyway, Kay said the little girl was attached to one of Mom's porcelain dolls. A doll my mom had found somewhere and brought home years ago. The spirit connected to it felt dark at first, but not evil. It seemed like she only wanted to scare people away to protect the home and my mom. By that time, my mom had already been living with us in Tennessee since 2020. Kay said that the night before coming over, she dreamt of the little girl walking into the house from the backyard, though in her dream, the layout of the room was flipped. When Kay saw the doll in person, she said, "Its name is Gayla." But she also felt this deep, heavy darkness and fear around it. Still, she believed the little spirit wasn't truly bad, just lonely. Kay asked us to leave her alone with the doll for about 30 minutes. When she came out, Kay told us she didn't think Gayla had ever been human. She couldn't quite tell what she was, but she felt Gayla simply needed a purpose, a job. The doll's spirit wanted to help and protect my mom's home. Kay decided to take the doll home with her. Now, Gayla sits on her shelf by Kay's front door, and every time someone walks in, the doll greets them. Kay talks to her all the time. As for the rest of the dolls, Kay donated them to young girls in her town and church. Some of those little girls had never had a doll before, so they were thrilled. I've always had a big fear of dolls, and my mom's house was always full of them.
1:36 a.m. Submitted by user Ominous89. This happened several years ago when I was a total deadbeat and lived in my then girlfriend's parents' house. They had a tri-level house with a basement that contained our living space and my girlfriend and my bedroom. Upstairs was the living space for everyone else, the dining room and kitchen. The third level had the master bedroom and 2 additional bedrooms for my girlfriend's sisters. I was home alone one night, with her parents off with friends. My girlfriend at a friend's house, and her sisters were at an all-night church event. I elected to stay home and play World of Warcraft all night. Where my computer and desk sat, right above my head, was an AC vent. Often, I could hear her sister playing in her room from that vent. I was playing when I heard laughing and giggling coming from the vent. Nobody was supposed to be home, so my heart picked up. I glanced at the clock on my computer, and it read 1:36 a.m. I remember this all very distinctly. I went to go investigate and headed upstairs. The way the landing sits is at the top of those stairs, you can turn left and either go downstairs or go into the kitchen. I climbed the second set of stairs and opened the first door on the left, which was her young sister's room, which is directly above the basement. Inside, I used the light on my phone to illuminate as best I could. I saw a small figure, what I assumed was a small girl, wrapped in a white sheet in the center of the room. This figure, this young girl, stops playing with the dolls and slowly looks at me. It let out the most ear-shattering scream you can imagine. My skin crawls just thinking about it, and my chest tightens just remembering it. I wish I could tell you what transpired, but I remember waking up at the bottom of the landing, right next to the door of the kitchen. I stumbled into the kitchen to get a drink of water and contemplate what the hell just happened. I glanced at the clock and the clock reads 4:46 a.m. We never found the sheet the next day, but the dolls the figure was playing with were sitting in the middle of the room, away from the toy chest, which is where the sister had put them away that afternoon. Footprints in the Snow. Submitted by user Wild and Wonderful. This happened to me about 10 years ago while I was attending college at West Virginia University. At the time, I was really into backcountry camping, which, for reasons that will become obvious, I am not into anymore. One of the benefits of attending college in West Virginia was the easy access to many beautiful and remote wilderness areas. Just south of the college was this vast area of mountains and forests called the Manila National Forest. This region is so remote that the government had set up a huge telescope in the region due to how dark it is because of lack of human population. Anyway, this particular backcountry trip occurred during the Thanksgiving break in classes. I had decided to stay in town and not head home for Thanksgiving that year, and a college buddy of mine, who I would often go on camping trips with, also ended up stranded in town. We had decided to use the break to go on a 3-day trip down to a region of West Virginia that we had always wanted to explore, but had not had the chance to do so before, due to it being a little further away than we could usually go. This region, known as the Cranberry Wilderness, had been talked about as being about as remote as one could get in any area east of the Mississippi. There were lots of stories about campers, hikers, and fishermen going into the Cranberry Wilderness and never coming out, with no trace of them ever being found. There was another story that I remember about a plane crash in the area, with the plane being found, but no trace of the 3 passengers, alive or dead, ever turning up. I would be lying if I said that this little bit of local lore didn't make the trip even more exciting. At the same time, I thought a lot of these stories were apocryphal or could easily be explained. It had been a very mild autumn up to that time, but the forecast looked like it was calling for ice and snow up in the mountains. Eventually, my buddy dropped out because of the forecast. Foolishly and stubbornly, I decided that I would go on my own. I had done a few solo trips before, and at the same time, this didn't really bother me. My plan for the trip was to do about a 10-mile hike on the first day, then camp, do another 10-mile hike on the second day, camp, and then hike 5 miles back to my car on the third day. The first day of my trip was rather uneventful. In line with its reputation, I did not see another person. The only eerie thing that happened was at night. I heard coyotes howling from the surrounding ridges, which is never a comforting sound when camping alone. On the second day of my hike, nothing went as planned. The trail that I was hiking on was much more rugged than I expected. At one point, I was supposed to turn on a connector trail to get to my second campsite, but this trail, which was on my map, was simply non-existent. This led me to having to take a much more circuitous route and adding about 5 miles onto the hike. Again, like the first day, I did not see another person. I reached my camp area for the second night at the ominously named Hell for Certain branch, just as it started to get dark. The temperature had been dropping all day as well, and as soon as I was able to get my camp set up and my fire started, it started to snow. When backcountry camping, I use a camping hammock that had been modified for winter camping, because I find it much more comfortable and lighter to carry than a tent. You can't help but feel, though, when you're in a hammock, which, unlike a regular hammock, surrounds you completely with material and a rain flag, that you are just hanging barefoot. Exhausted from my extended hike and wanting to get out of the snow, I climbed into my hammock, and as the last light of the day left, I drifted off to sleep. I slept like the dead until about 2 in the morning, when a loud sound jolted me awake. Confused and not knowing what had happened, I turned on my flashlight to look out the small mesh opening in my hammock. I could tell by looking at the ground that it had been snowed about an inch overnight, but I couldn't see more than 2 feet away from my hammock because a thick white fog had descended upon the forest. I was thinking that maybe I had had a bad dream when I heard an indescribable, unworldly howl. I couldn't place where it was coming from, as it seemed to be coming from all around me. At this point, I was terrified and lay in my sleeping bag in my hammock, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. I listened intently, but the woods around me were completely silent after the howl. I didn't hear the howl again, and I laid there for about 3 hours, not knowing what to do, and sure that I would get lost and never be found if I ran off into that thick fog. At around 5 a.m., I finally got up enough bravery to get out of the hammock. After lying there for the past 3 hours, I finally rationalized that howl as some form of sleep paralysis. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, where you wake up but are still dreaming and cannot move, and have weird auditory and visual perceptions. It seemed that the fog had started to dissipate a little bit, so my first order of business was to use a bathroom that I had been holding in for the past 3 hours. With my headlamp on and my handheld flashlight and lightweight hatchet in hand, I crept away from the hammock into the nearby stand of trees. I shined my lights ahead. I could now see about 20 feet and saw nothing amiss. More confident now that my experience could indeed be chalked up to sleep paralysis, I relaxed and began to empty my bladder. I then noticed that my stream was landing into an indentation in the snow. Examining this indentation closer, I noticed that it looked like a footprint from a bare human foot. I quickly zipped up and started examining the snow all around my hammock much closer. All around, I noticed hundreds of footprints and what looked like human handprints in the snow. Needless to say, I freaked out and without packing up the hammock, started running the last 5 miles to my car. I haven't told many people this story for fear that they will think that I'm crazy. At the same time, I've tried to rationalize the whole thing and say that maybe it was just sleep paralysis. But I can tell you one thing's for sure. I have not been camping, whether alone or in a group, since that day, and do not ever plan to go camping again. The Hand, submitted by user Ink Smudged Hands. Growing up as a Navy brat, I lived in several houses, but only one was haunted. The thing was, it was a brand new house. However, the land was old and had a bloody history. This was in Virginia, where you could throw a stone and hit something colonial or Civil War or slave trade related almost every time. This brand new ranch-style house was always cold. Even in the hot, humid summers, you could turn off the AC and it would still be cold, to the point that my toes would cramp up. Lights were always flickering despite the wiring being new. Doorknobs were always being jiggled. The door that led into the garage was always shaking. Mom, who never bought the concept of the house being haunted, would say, "Oh, that's the wind going through the garage." Never mind that the garage door was almost always closed. The rest of the doors would close themselves a few seconds after being open. Not slamming themselves, mind you, just slowly closing themselves. And they hadn't always done this. For years, they stayed open. Then one day, they all seemingly just started to start closing by themselves. I always had this uneasy feeling of being watched by something. One night, whatever or whoever it was touched me. I'm 11. Being 11 and doing things 11-year-olds do, I sneaked out to the living room in the middle of the night to watch some late-night television. Like every kid who does this, I had my face inches from the screen and the volume almost down to 0. An itch began to build between my shoulders, almost like someone was poking me. I reached over, and that's when I felt it. A hand. A man's hand. My fingers touched in between fingers and brushed knuckles. I gasped and turned around. Nothing. I turned off the television, jumped up, and ran back to my room, under the covers. I buried myself, hoping that whatever had touched me wasn't going to follow me and start poking me again. It didn't, but after that, I didn't sneak out to watch late-night television for months and months. When I finally did, I would watch the screen for a minute, then turn around to make sure no one was behind me. There was no way I was going to be poked by a ghost again. Summer Camp, submitted by Anonymous. This past summer, my girlfriend took me to the summer camp she usually works at. It was completely empty, no rangers or guests at this Northeast Georgia camp. So we traversed the trails and she revealed the little secret paths in history that one wouldn't get to appreciate on a normal visit. History such as the visit of John Barnum and the Cherokee people who once lived there. When we were finally ready to leave, we talked a little more on the way back to the parking lot. No, this camp has an amphitheater. Little walls extended beyond the bottom rows to sandwich visitors between it, and the lake the amphitheater faces, guiding them towards the seats or away from them. And behind that wall, I see a tall black figure with lanky limbs and no face. No face, but a head with 3 protrusions that extended upwards and went down as if weighing themselves down. It was walking a slow, ponderous walk, its hands swinging past its knees. And as if noticing my gaze, bent down and curled into a ball behind the wall, disappearing. I didn't freak out, but started questioning my girlfriend insistently. Did you see that? What was that? Is anyone here? She managed to extract from me what I saw of that being, and then she told me to run. The campers who work there insist the camp is haunted. None dared to walk alone between the buildings at night. After driving out of the camp, my girlfriend and I discussed everything I saw, some of the paranormal things that seemed to happen, the things others have seen. A house a group saw on Google Maps in the forest, only to find no trace of it in the same clearing. A large white possum, human-sized to be exact, captured on a hunting camera and seen by a counselor and some Boy Scouts she was hiking with. These walkers tend to be part of some of these happenings. The last part is what cinches it for me. My girlfriend didn't tell anyone of what I saw. I felt a little crazy myself. Obviously a mistake on my part, until my girlfriend and I talked one night. She told me a group of counselors, her included, hung out in the teaching center late at night. They planned to sleep there, get away from some of the other kids that they had to share the room with. After talking late into the night, everyone fell asleep in their bags. One counselor woke up having trouble sleeping. He looked out into the forest surrounding the teaching center, and he saw them. It wasn't just one walker. 3 walkers tread a path around the center. They walked a circle around the people. Then they walked away. The counselor didn't find sleep for a long time. He didn't even tell others of the events of that night until a week later. Then my girlfriend told him what I saw. And the counselors there are adamant that the camp is haunted. The Haunted House, submitted by user Hameling for Mitchell. A few years ago, my aunt, uncle, and 4 cousins moved into a new house out in the suburbs. It was their first house and was surprisingly cheap based on the neighborhood and size. Things seemed to be going great for them, but after 6 months of living there, they suddenly announced that they were getting divorced and my uncle moved out. He was always a bit goofy, so no one really blamed my aunt, but it was surprising as they were so happy before. Fast forward 3 to 4 months. My aunt keeps finding pictures knocked off the wall and dishes broken on the ground. One night, another aunt goes over to babysit the kids, and she tells my aunt that she kept hearing someone whispering behind her while the kids were asleep, and banging noises. My cousins, who were all between 3 and 8 years old, began telling my aunt that they're seeing a man in the house, especially the 4-year-old. She keeps telling my aunt that there's an all-black man in the bathroom and he has no face. One night, my aunt woke up to the 4-year-old screaming, so she runs into her bedroom and sees her thrashing at the air, trying to hit something. My aunt runs over and sees that she wet the bed. She tells my aunt that a monster was kneeling next to her bed and was whispering to her, and she was trying to get away. A while later, she once again tells my aunt that the faceless man was in the bathroom. When my aunt goes to check, she says, "Never mind, he went into your room." That night, my aunt wakes up when she feels something sitting on her side of the bed. She sees the depression on the mattress, and when she sits up, the mattress raises as if something got up. Another night, she felt something pulling her feet, jerking her towards the end of the bed, but nothing was there. They finally called a medium to go in, and the woman walked in and apparently began to feel extremely ill. The woman said whatever was in there was demonic, and it wanted to tear the family apart. She left quickly after and called the next day, explaining that she had to pull her car over and throw up on the way home and had horrible nightmares about the house when she got home. She looked into the previous owner and found out that the person had been doing seances for money in the home and something never left. She suggested calling a priest to exorcise the house. The one of the archdiocese sent over was the guy that the movie The Rite with Anthony Hopkins was loosely based on. He asked to have all family members there that could make it, but not ones that were quick to anger and aggression. They blessed the house, and everything's been all right since. Baby Carlos and the Basement Ghost, submitted by user Jasmine314. This story takes place in the home my family and I grew up in. Carlos was only 3 years old at the time. Therefore, this took place about 15 years ago. I was about 6 years old. I don't remember every detail, only some. Most of the story is based on details provided by my older brothers and sisters. My little brother, at this time, seemed to have an imaginary friend. This is what we believed, since we would catch him talking to someone in the basement when there was no other being but him. I remember sneaking up on him all the time while he was running and talking to someone. Me and my brothers and sisters would listen through the vents and hear him giggle, run around, and play peekaboo. No one was actually there, so everyone assumed he had an imaginary friend. He never mentioned a name or anything, so we just called this imaginary friend, Friend. One day, Anna, Rosa, Carlos, and I were home alone. I was in the kitchen making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for Carlos. Rosa and Anna were in the living room watching TV, and Carlos was in the basement playing with Friend. I walked past the basement door, heard a ball bouncing, and Carlos was saying, "Throw it." I was always scared of Carlos's imaginary friend. I didn't want to interrupt them playing, but his sandwich was done. I went into the living room and asked Anna to walk to the basement with me to go get Carlos. I was too afraid to go alone. She agreed to hold my hand and everything. The steps to the basement curve before you get to the bottom steps. We went down the first 4 steps and then turned left to go down the rest of the stairs. As soon as I turned left and took my first step, I peeped around the corner of the steps to see Carlos. What I saw frightened me so much that I pulled my head back as fast as I could and told Anna to look. We peeped around the corner and stared for about 30 seconds. Then we screamed and ran up the stairs. This is what we saw. Carlos would bounce the ball. The ball would stop in midair and come back to him, as if someone would catch and throw it back. Me and Anna ran to the living room and jumped on the couch with Rosa. Rosa asked for an explanation to why we were screaming. We told her what we saw, but she had to see for herself. We went back down the stairs, and this time we walked all the way down and found Carlos sitting on the middle of the floor, staring across the basement with a blank look on his face. Rosa said, "What's wrong, Carlos?" And he didn't reply. Then she asked, "Where did the ball go?" And Carlos said, "He took it." "Who took it?" asked Rosa. Suddenly, the ball rolled towards her from the left side of the basement and hit her left foot. She picked up Carlos and we all ran upstairs. Man in Black, submitted by user Mulder81. This happened when I was younger. I worked at a gas station when I was 19 in 1979. It was an isolated place just outside of town next to the freeway. So many times it could get busy, and other times it was just as desolate as it looked. I worked part-time after college until 8 or 10 at night. This particular night was slow and stormy. It was a cold, dark, rainy night in October. Sometimes friends would stop over to visit, but this night with the thunder and hard rain, it kept everyone away. I was bored with only having a TV with 3 stations and a radio. I pulled my Buick in for an oil change as no business was coming my way. I found an old radio station that was telling ghost stories, so I turned it up and got to work. I knew if a customer came in, the bell would ring as the car pulls up to the pump. I had the car up on the lift and was draining the oil when a visitor appeared inside of the garage. I was not aware of him, nor did I hear the bell ring. Then he spoke. "Hello, sir, can you help me?" I dropped my wrench from fright of his voice. The sight of him scared me even more. He was right out of the UFO files and magazines where you hear about men in black visiting you after witnessing a UFO. He was wearing a black suit with a white shirt, sporting a thin black tie. He also wore a black hat and had dark shades on. He was about 6 feet tall and looked pale and old. He kept his hand on his throat and he just stood there looking at me. The scariest thing is, when he spoke, it sounded mechanical. Then he spoke again in that robotic voice. "Can you help me, sir?" He was a customer and I had to get a grip on myself and overcome the shock. I approached him. He was wondering about directions to a section of town. I cannot get over his voice, but I figured with his hand on his neck that he had a voice box transplant, perhaps from smoking or something. But it sure was creepy. I gave him the information and he thanked me, still holding his throat, and with a slight slouch, he walked out the door. I was relieved, but still shook. I then noticed something very odd. I realized that he was not even wet from the pouring rain. I thought to myself, is he a man in black, or did I just give directions to a UFO witness that just occurred, and now he has to give a visitation? I then laughed at my thought and quickly looked out the towering glass walls of the station to see him leave. Then, the scary feeling led me in total disbelief when I saw no car, no headlights, or taillights, and I realized the bell never rang. I had to think to myself, how did he get here, and who did I just see? These last 2 stories were shared with me by Will Soto, the host of the Red Treehouse podcast. We've done some story swaps before, and he always does a great job with the stories that you've previously heard on Chillers and Thrillers. The link for his show is in the show notes. Thank you, Will, for sharing these stories. Just a bit of pre-context. Every night before bed, I do a quick walkthrough of my house. I turn off my lights, I lock my doors, I get my dog situated. Growing up in New York City, we always locked everything and checked and double-checked to make sure nothing was open or cracked or unlocked. Even now, living in a nice, quiet area with cows and dead people as neighbors, I check everything. Sometime last summer, I put my home address into Google Maps and was surprised to find a cemetery icon about 100 feet beyond our property line. Later that night, me and the kids went out, hopped the fence, and found a series of grave markers in the dirt. It was difficult to make out the names and dates, but at least one of the graves was that of a child who died sometime in the 1850s. The graves are about 20 feet from the fence and no more than 75 feet from the side of our house. We believe our house is haunted by 2 ghosts. One is a little boy who catches us by surprise. We've seen him standing in corners or peeking around doorways. We call him Henry, and we mostly freak out because we're not expecting to see him. The other ghost is much darker. He or it scares the hell out of us. We've run out of rooms, avoided going into rooms, because his presence is even scarier. Now that you have the context, here are the stories. Story 1. Sometime back around the holidays, I'm going to say it was early December, I was doing my normal close-up routine before going to bed. Earlier that day, I'd folded a few loads of laundry on the dining room table, where they were neatly stacked. After turning off the laundry room light, I was standing in an entryway between the laundry room and kitchen. I looked into the dining room, which was nearly pitch black. There, peeking over the stack of folded laundry, I saw the top portion of a child's head, with the eyes looking right at me. In the blink of an eye, it was gone, and the chill and fear didn't hit me until I walked into the living room, turned on the light, and no one was there. Story 2. When our family first moved into the house a few years ago, my daughter claimed the downstairs bedroom. I'm always the last one to go to bed at night and the first one to wake up in the morning, usually around 5:45 a.m. One morning, I head downstairs to let the dogs out and make coffee, and I'm immediately annoyed that every light is on. I mean, every light. Overheads, table lamps, floor lamps, television. I remember mumbling something to myself about these damn kids while going room to room and turning everything off. After turning everything off, I let the dogs out, made a coffee, and sit a bit and relax before getting the kids up for school. This was before the days of the Red Treehouse. An hour or so later, around 7:15 a.m., I start waking the kids up for school. After getting herself ready and before heading down to catch the school bus, my daughter says, "Dad, something weird happened last night." I said, "Yeah, definitely. One of you left every light on down here." In a moment that is lasered into my memory, her focus sharpened and she says, "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't me." She then goes on to tell me the worst, scariest story I've ever heard. Sometime around 2 a.m., she was jolted from sleep by someone knocking on her bedroom door. This door is closest to the front door. She told them to come in, but the knocking continued for another couple of seconds before stopping. A few seconds later, it started again. This time, she walked over and opened the door. There was no one there, and every light was off. Scared, she jumped back into bed and put her AirPods in. A few seconds later, she heard knocking again. This time on the door that exits to the kitchen. Thinking it was one of her brothers, she walked over quickly and opened the door. There was no one there, and every light was on. At this point, she was too scared to run up the stairs to our bedroom, so she just crawled into the bed and tried not to fall asleep. After hearing this, I asked why she didn't call or text us to come downstairs. And she said she didn't want to bother us, and we wouldn't have come downstairs, which is only true because we keep our ringers on silent and wouldn't have heard the message or call come in. The all lights on thing has happened 3 times since we lived here, but the most recent was back in March. If you want to hear more about Will's haunted house and all the strange occurrences that have happened even before he discovered the graves, check out the Red Treehouse, episode 6. And that's all for this year's Halloween special. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment, send me an email, and I would also love to hear your own spooky stories. So if you have any, feel free to share them with me at chillersandthrillers@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. I hope all you ghouls and ghosts have a wonderful Halloween, and I'll see you next time.